If you're leading a digital asset or RWA strategy in Asia, Japan just sent a very clear signal last month. During Japan FinTech Week, Blockchain Summit 2026 brought together over 500 leaders from megabanks, regulators, and global tokenization players. And they all agreed on one thing. Tokenization, RWAs, and stablecoins are moving from pilots to full-scale implementation. I'm Keisuke of Wakyodo and venture partner at Donigi Capital. In episode 74 of Japan Digital Asset Weekly, I'll share the 4 takeaways from the summit that should shape your 2026 to 2027 institutional roadmap. Let's start with how traditional finance is actually framing this shift. In a keynote from Credit Suisse's senior leadership, digital public infrastructure like India's UPI and Brazil's PIX was described as a key driver of national competitiveness. The argument was simple. Once asset digitization is complete, blockchain naturally becomes the connective infrastructure between previously isolated systems. But when you move from theory to practice, a huge operational gap appears. On a panel with SMBC and Mizuho, executives agreed that while blockchain changes how services are delivered, the requirements for trust and safety don't change at all. One example stood out. Even when security tokens are fully digital, settlement is still stuck in the traditional T+2 world. To unlock the real value of tokenization, reducing admin load and counterparty risk, they see near-instant, stablecoin-based settlement as an urgent necessity. And they were clear that these initiatives only survive if they are backed by sustainable business models that justify ongoing infrastructure investment. Second, global tokenization players were surprisingly aligned on why so many RWA projects die at the pilot stage. In a fireside chat with Stellar and Kenanga investors, 3 conditions kept coming up: timing, organizational structure, and distribution. Technology has to become invisible to end users, and Japan's advanced regulatory framework should now be used to build scalable use cases, not just proofs of concept. That message was reinforced by a new strategic partnership announcement between Kenanga and Stellar, underlying that real capital is now moving. But scaling a projected $16 trillion tokenization market means breaking through what several speakers call the invisible wall. Leaders from Emergo, Sony Ventures, and Omdo argued that regulatory clarity, investor protection, robust risk management, and privacy are not optional. Because transparency and privacy often pull in opposite directions on chain, dedicated privacy layers and strict KYC and whitelisting from day one become essential if institutions are going to participate at scale. D3 Labs made that point very dramatic. Ignore the hype about massive TMs, and instead, build products that offer ironclad legal protection and can be distributed through compliant channels, including carefully structured DeFi. Third, the conversations around stablecoins made it clear that the technology is ready, but the last mile is still hard. Recent changes to Japan's Payment Services Act created a new intermediary license, allowing platforms with huge retail reach, from e-commerce to gaming, to build seamless on- and off-ramps. A concrete example is Circle and SBI USDC rollout in Japan. Tourists pay in stablecoins, merchants receive fiat, and the merchant experience problem essentially disappears. But as stablecoins and tokenized assets scale globally, another technical wall appears: extreme fragmentation across hundreds of isolated chains. Relying on traditional monolithic bridges introduces serious security risk. That's why omnichain interoperability via standards messaging is increasingly seen as a prerequisite for any secure global financial system. Finally, when the discussion turned to everyday Japanese consumers, one golden rule emerged: stop talking about technology. In a skeptical market, you win by using familiar words like Bitcoin instead of crypto, wrapping NFTs as simple digital items, and focusing on experiential value, entertainment, access, and community rather than infrastructure. The more on-chain the backend becomes, the less the users should ever think about it. So what does this mean if you're building in or into Asia? Japan is now moving aggressively from pilots to full-scale implementation. The teams that win this next cycle will align tightly with regulation, stable settlement and privacy, establish robust interoperability, and make the technology disappear for end users. At Wakyodo, as a strategic partner for Japan's regulated digital asset ecosystem, we help global teams navigate exactly this landscape, from market entry and compliant RWA structuring to institutional partnerships. If you find this episode helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone planning their Asian RWA or stablecoin strategy. Thanks for watching, and see you next Monday.